Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webcast brought to you by Compliance Week. I'm Arti Maharaj, Digital Content Editor of Compliance Week, and I'll be hosting today's webcast. Today we're going to be talking about creating a multi-year compliance training and communications plan. But before we hear from our guests, let me quickly go over the agenda for this afternoon. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then we'll jump right into the presentation sponsored by NAVEX Global. That presentation will be followed by a question and answer session. Your questions will be kept confidential and anonymous, so please don't be shy. You can ask your questions at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll pose them to our guests at the end of their presentation. After the Q&A, I'll wrap up the webcast. This webcast will also offer CPE credit for all attendees. Please disable your pop-up blockers in order to access the exam. To obtain your CPE credit, wait until the webcast is completely over and I sign off. At that point, the final examination will be presented automatically in a separate window. Again, please ensure your pop-up blockers are disabled. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to info@complianceweek.com to request a copy. I'll repeat these instructions at the end of the webcast, so if you missed anything, stay tuned. A few other administrative details: at any time during the presentation, listeners can download the slides from the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your screen. You can also hit the View Slide Full Screen button at the bottom of your screen if you wish to increase the slide size. And lastly, a Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. Today's webcast is part of a series that Compliance Week launched a few years ago. We hold these webcasts just about every week, usually on Thursdays, and our guests have been Chief Compliance and Governance Officers at leading public companies and experts on various compliance, regulatory governance, and risk topics. I'm not going to read the upcoming schedule, but you can certainly visit www.complianceweek.com for details or to register. In addition, Compliance Week is now offering in-depth reports on subjects relevant to compliance, audit, and risk executives. For more information, please visit www.complianceweek.com/reports. Now on to our panel. Joining us today is Mary Bennett, Vice President, Advisory Services at NAVEX Global. In addition to a role at NAVEX Global, Mary is also a pharmacist by training. She previously served as Vice President in the Compliance and Integrity Office at Caremark, where she implemented the requirements of one of the first government agreements in healthcare. Mary works across all industries for the Advisory Services team, creating and facilitating award-winning training programs, conducting large and small program assessments, developing compliance communications, and helping clients develop best practice programs from the ground up. And our next speaker is Ingrid Fredeen, JD, Vice President, Online Learning Content at NAVEX Global. Ingrid has been specializing in ethics and legal compliance training for more than 10 years. She has been the principal design and content developer of NAVEX Global's online training course initiatives. Prior to joining NAVEX Global, Ingrid also worked as a litigator with Littler Mendelsohn, an employment law firm. She also served as an in-house corporate counsel for General Mills. We're glad to have you here. So Ingrid, why don't you get us started?
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. And I'm excited to be presenting today with my colleague, Mary Bennett, whom I will have say hello in just a moment after we kick this off. So thank you once again. With the number of registrants we have for this webinar and the number of people who are attending, clearly this is a topic that is generating great interest in the ethics and compliance community. And my colleague, Mary Bennett, and I have been talking about education plans for years and helping clients develop them. So we're very excited to give you access to some exciting resources as well as some new thinking and thought leadership that we've developed on this particular topic. And like I said, my colleague Mary Bennett, I'd love for you to say hello. We've got a great bio, and we're excited to be presenting today. Mary, thank you.
Yeah, very happy to be here and looking forward to the session.
As you heard, don't be shy. Go ahead and submit your questions. Mary and I have a very big agenda today. We wanted to give everybody on the call and everyone who accesses this deck some really good information that showcases our collective decades of experience in helping clients build education plans. And there's no question that we are seeing an increased interest in this as programs become more sophisticated and are held more accountable for results. And so this is actually a brand new and retooled presentation that we've done and showcases some of the new thought leadership we have on this. So we're very excited to present. By all means, submit your questions and comments. Everything that you provide to us helps us build better presentations going forward. As I look at what we're going to do and how we're going to break down the webinar today, we've got a couple of nice big objectives. It's a tactical webinar in the sense that we're going to hope that you learn a lot from this, that you're going to be able to take away some great tips and actually operationalize them where you work. And so we're going to start with what is a multi-year education plan and why do you need one. We're going to break it down into 7 key steps, and then we're going to give you some tips about how to operationalize your plan and put it into place. Obviously, we'll wrap it up with a few key takeaways, and time permitting, we will definitely answer some questions and answer some questions. Excuse me. Like I said, we've got a lot of information. We will move through slides fairly quickly, but we want you to have these slides as a resource so you'll find great information on them that we may not necessarily cover. The first place that I want to start with is really about our vision for compliance and education on compliance topics, and how does it fit into the broader compliance ecosystem. At NAVEX, we have a very strong passion for what we do. We believe in it. We believe that we bring value to organizations. We believe that you as compliance professionals have a very significant impact on the employees in your organization because you're committed to this and you're really energized about giving them stuff that will help them do their job better every day. So at NAVEX, we have what we call a compliance ecosystem of products that we sell to our clients to help them build that super strong ecosystem. And you can see by this slide, it just shares with you the different products that we provide to create that holistic ecosystem. We believe very strongly in this. We've been building this for many, many years as we've acquired new businesses and new opportunities to share with clients. But today, this particular presentation is going to help you with a couple of key parts of this ecosystem. It is going to give you some insight into how online training will fit into the ecosystem work that you're doing, as well as employee awareness and advisory services, whether you're doing the consulting yourself in-house or whether you're using external consultants, advisors, lawyers, compliance professionals. So you can see that this education plan touches a number of these ecosystem items. So it's a very important piece of building that structure. Now with that, Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you because the first big question is, well, what's a multi-year education plan and why do we need one? I mean, it's the burning question, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and this is really the meat of the matter today, so let's get right to it. This is what our vision is for an education plan. It's really a roadmap. It's a roadmap that you can create by strategically identifying the tools, the audiences, the topics, the timing, and the formats you need to meet your ethics and compliance education objectives. Now, a good plan often includes many methods, and that's, some people will have default methods, right? You might use 1 or 2 methods for all of your education. But a really good plan will have full-length training. It's classic. There's going to be training that might be several minutes long, maybe even hours, supplemented by periodic short communications like posters, emails, short videos to reinforce the training points and to deliver information that may not be in the training. So let's move into a polling question right off the bat here to get some benchmarking for everybody on this webinar. Does your organization have a formally prepared multi-year education plan for compliance? Yes, no, we're working on it, or I don't know. Artie, please push the poll out. We have 45 seconds for people to answer.
And Mary, this is an area that you and I have seen a lot of, I think, change, especially in the last couple of years. We've talked about the importance of compliance training plans, education plans, but it's really within the last couple of years, I think you and your practice and on my side have seen an increase in interest.
There certainly has been. There's been quite a lot of interest and a lot more people doing work in this area. Let's take a look at these results. Okay, everybody should be able to see that. Most people picked number 4, we're working on it. A few people picked know that you're not doing it. So we have quite a few people on this webinar, Ingrid, that should benefit from what we're going to be talking about today.
Well, and yet even for those who say yes, the great news is, and it's a small percentage. I mean, you can see when you look at those numbers, if we've got 21% who say, yeah, we've got something in place, there's a larger group right now that's either working on it or maybe hasn't started on that. And so for everybody on this call, you will be able to pick up some tips. Even if you have a plan in place, I guarantee you'll walk away with some great ideas on how to enhance that plan. So great to see those stats. And I think, like I said, that number is increasing on who's interested in learning more, in creating these multi-year education plans. So.
I agree. So let's get right into how we view a multi-year education plan. You can see here that we have 7 basic elements to the plan. And if you look at elements 1 through 4, these are the user-facing elements that your learners will encounter, things like topics, audience groupings, timing, methods. The last 3 elements that we'll talk about are really what I call the back office pieces. They're the behind-the-scenes glue that holds the whole plan together and allows for this great plan to actually be actualized and delivered to the people who need to get it. What I'm providing for you on this slide is really a sample of the goal. This is where you're going to be going with all of the discussion today. When the elements come together, it creates a plan something like what you see. It's very simple, in fact, in that it's an Excel spreadsheet, but it's packed with all the necessary information you need to create a comprehensive and effective approach to your ethics and compliance education. This is one of the tools that's available in your Event Resources tab if you want to download it today.
And Mary, I just want to make a call out here because, advisory services, you guys use these plans, you've developed them. This is really special for this particular group of webinar participants. You've never shared this particular document outside of a client engagement, so it's a very valuable document. I'd also call Mary, you've got one listed here for 2 years, and really a good, healthy plan is oftentimes maybe 3 or 4 years in length as well. So just to flag that and thanks for sharing this. This is really wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends on your appetite for planning. Some people anticipate changes in their organization. They don't want to go further than 2 years. And some people really want to plan long term. So you're absolutely right, Ingrid. These are very flexible. You can plan for multiple years. All right. Let's move along and talk about the benefits. Why do you really need one of these plans in the first place? Well, there's many benefits on this slide. And as Ingrid said, we're not going to hit all of our points today. But some of the call-outs that I want to emphasize are this. Number 1, it will help you achieve the federal sentencing guidelines standard of periodically training and communicating with employees based on the risks that they face in their roles in the organization. That's huge. Many people still do one-size-fits-all training. They put out a code of conduct training once a year and that's it. That is not the standard that we're trying to achieve here. Second, this plan will help you develop an education strategy that is more relevant to learners. And what happens when you have content that's more relevant? You have more motivation for people to participate, more engagement in the types of education that you're putting out there. The next point I want to make is that the plan provides for the appropriate frequency and reinforcement of the messages that you've put out there in training, and also for vehicles for putting out points that are not in training that are important to communicate to the employee base. So it's really important for reinforcement as well as new information, because the reinforcement, we all know from advertising, gets stuff to stick. And the fourth point I want to make is evidence of an education strategy will really help you if you have regulators interested in seeing something like that. It's always good to be bulletproof, and this really helps you to do that.
So one of my passions that Mary is well aware of and she's worked on with me in the past is benchmarking. And in the area of training, I don't think there's a lot of great benchmarking data out there for you, but it is a very important part of creating a strong training and education program. So NAVEX, each year we release a phenomenal training benchmark report, and I will share a few details and some information throughout this presentation. Just know that should you be interested in the training benchmark report, which is a very extensive report, or a webinar on that topic, or any of our follow-up stuff, you can absolutely access that and through our NAVEX website, or contact us, or reach out to me, or anything like that. So, but you know, I mentioned earlier that there is a growing trend to do education planning, and we saw this year in our second annual benchmark report. More organizations are actually looking at doing these, which to me signifies that we're getting a little bit greater rigor around our programs. We're recognizing the need for this. And compliance professionals are being held more accountable for results, this is one way that you can do it. You can really create a nice, solid plan that helps you accomplish objectives, as well as overcome some of the biggest challenges facing compliance training programs. And in that report, you'll see that the top three are managing limited seat time, trying to cover more topics without more budget or more seat time, and measuring and improving effectiveness. So really critical challenges for the programs, and something that a training and education plan can really help you accomplish. So let's just start digging right into these steps so we can help get through this presentation and get you everything you need. The first one that I say, and this isn't a step, but this is a major fumbling or faltering spot here for many organizations, is that we don't start with our objectives. We start with buying products and training and building training and figuring out what the most common things are to train on, and then we move forward and we push it out. But as these programs become more integrated into our culture and they become more important in what we need them to do, we as compliance professionals really need to look at and challenge what are the objectives of our training program. So in the training benchmark report, or in the survey, we do ask participants this question. We had nearly 760 responses from chief compliance officers and senior compliance professionals and lawyers and members of the HR function. And the top objective for the second year is to build a culture of ethics and respect. Other objectives come very high, and people often have multiple objectives, such as regulatory compliance or preventing misconduct or creating a speak-up culture. So check that report out and take a look at those. But come to a consensus on what your objectives are, and let those objectives define and drive the behaviors that you and the decisions you make as you roll out and create this education plan. It's very important. And periodically check back against those objectives. Have you strayed from that prime objective? The one that I see is this create a culture of ethics and respect. It's a very lofty objective. It's also very easy to let other criteria sort of derail you, and cost is often the one that takes people farthest away from obtaining that create a culture of ethics and respect. They maybe go with the low-end training, and that is not going to drive your program in the way that you want it to. So definitely start with your objectives. So the first step is really identifying the risks. This is, I think, an overwhelming task for people. We all know and we all hear the world of regulatory compliance is getting more complex. It's incredibly complex as it is. Compliance professionals feel a little bit overwhelmed. They don't have the full understanding, and then we've got new risks coming in all the time. So as a compliance professional, it's not your job to know the answers. It's your job to help find the answers. And that means, you're going to draw on your own expertise, but you're also going to bring in data points from all over your organization and outside your organization. And don't be surprised if you are surprised and there's a risk lurking out there that you maybe hadn't thought about, but you discover during this process. So some of the things that I advise people to use and allow to influence the project of identifying risks is industry regulations, legal and regulatory, obviously, but enforcement trends. What changes in your business have occurred? Do you have internal drivers or risks or concerns? When you look at the training benchmark report, you'll see the top 3 concerns that professionals have that undermine their training effectiveness. Are those yours? If they are, how are you resolving them? Look at your trend data, your hotline data, your litigation or enforcement data. Talk to your subject matter experts and benchmark, right? And then also program assessments. So all of that information comes together to create a picture of what topics you should be training on. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all. It's not as if there are 10 topics that everyone must train on this cadence. Wish it were that easy. I wish the law was that clear, but it is much more murky than that. And so this is the next step, which is analyzing and prioritizing the risks. Get inputs from other people in your organization. Not all risks are created equally. Bribery and corruption is a massive risk for organizations doing business globally with distribution chains and sales chains and new business development ventures and working with foreign governments. For some organizations, it's a very minor risk. It may still be there, but it's not as big of a deal. Those 2 companies should be dedicating different levels of resource and time to that topic, and that should be the analysis you do for each of your risk areas. So the things that I like to bucket and make it as easy as possible are consider the likelihood and the frequency of your risk, the impact. How damaging would an event or a failure be to your organization in both sense of time and money, so and reputation. And then consider it against your goal. And by this I mean, each organization has its own culture and its own risk appetite. Some are very risk avoidance. And so you might see in those organizations you're going to train a lot heavier, you're going to train more people. Some are less concerned about different risks and willing to take some risks. In those organizations there are topics that might get lighter training or be addressed in a lighter way while they focus on some other ones. So think about where you sit in that risk appetite. The other thing is to consider a professional risk assessment conducted by a consultant or a lawyer. These are really important parts of developing the right coverage for your training program. If you're doing it, great. If not, definitely look at some of the NAVEX resources that will give you some insights into what it is and how you do them, as well as some of the services we provide to help you if you should ever need that. So I'm going to throw up a couple of training benchmark slides here just to give you a sense about what are the top topics, what are companies training on. And you shouldn't be terribly surprised by the main or the top ethics and compliance topics. And this is a great place to check your own program against. Am I doing these topics, and am I doing them as frequently as I should? Now, when you look at this, the question was, what topics will your organization train on in the next 2 to 3 years? I'm actually going to call out the one that I think is most surprising, which is cybersecurity. And that number comes in at 38%. There's a risk that is an emerging risk. It is on the minds and the thoughts of every member of every board across the country and probably the globe. And it is something that keeps your senior executives up at night. It is also something that is easily mitigated to some degree through training on the human error component of cybersecurity risk. And yet we only have 38% of organizations thinking they're going to train on it in the next 2 to 3 years. So very surprising. The call out for me is our programs aren't adapting and evolving quick enough. So when you look at these lists, don't just think about, do I have the same top 5 or 10? Think about, are there areas on here that surprise me that more people should be doing? Should my program be evolving? The next one is the HR topics or the traditional employment law topics. Again, kind of standard, no big surprises, with the exception of diversity and inclusion. That one bumped up quite a bit from last year. lots of press coverage on it, lots of high race tension issues in the media and the news, and lots of initiatives in sectors like the tech and software industries. And so you're seeing some movement there. So think about, how do I look against that, and are there any changes I need to make in my particular program? And certainly beyond your traditional topics, think about some of the other things you might want to cover in your courses, your own helpline, your own policies, specific rules or processes related to retaliation prevention. There's a great list here for you of just additional things that you can think of training on or adding to existing training. Now, Mary, the next big question is audience, and who are you training, and how frequently and who? So.
Exactly. Audience is the next thing. How do you group people for your training? Let's see how you're doing that by doing another polling question here. How do you segment your audiences for training today? Choose all that apply. This is a choose all that apply, so you can press more than one number here. We do not segment all employees, get the same training. By job level we segment, manager versus non-manager, by job function, by location, by risk exposure, or you use some other method. RT, please enable the polling. I will watch the clock for 45 seconds and make sure we get everybody. This is an interesting area, I think, Ingrid, because right now, I don't think that, based on the experience that I've had with our clients, people don't do a lot of segmentation. What is your sense of that?
Yeah, it's really hard, right? It takes a lot of, it takes a little extra time, an extra step. But what we're seeing is enforcement agencies are saying, we get it. You can't train everybody on every topic, right? We need to actually get some work done. And so companies are now starting to see it as they've got these seat pressures, budget constraints. They're saying, okay, how do we use our seat time and our scarce resources more effectively? And I think, you and I are starting to see this. People are kind of going, I want to segment my audiences now, but they don't know how to do it yet. They're not quite sure what they can do.
Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. I believe that the results are now on a pop-up for everybody to see. You can see that most people do their segmentation by job function, which is great. That should align with risk exposure, and also by job level, so manager versus non-manager versus frontline people. And some people are also doing it by location, so maybe they're adapting and localizing content based on where people are at when they undergo training and other kinds of communications. So that's good. There is a fair amount of segmentation going on right now. So let's move into this idea of segmenting your audience and talk about a basic approach. For people who want to start more simply, the basic approach may be what you do perhaps in your first year or so of trying to plan for your education needs. So you may do your segmentation based on certainly the level within the organization, as many of you are doing. You may do it based on the actual group within the organization. I want to call out here that in basic segmentation, we don't want to lose sight of training and communicating with boards of directors and third parties. I know based on Ingrid's benchmark survey data, those are still very educated groups within our organizations, and we can't lose sight of the fact that they need education as well. So thinking about some simple strategies here, maybe you give code training to all your employees. Maybe you're going to do something more in-depth around code responsibilities for managers, maybe in a live session, and then have some sort of a brochure perhaps for your third parties on the principles of your code so they understand what your expectations are. So that would be a basic segmentation. The next level of segmentation we call advanced. And this is where you get more granular, where you can get deeper into a topic for people who are more exposed to a risk, for instance. You may have departments, you may have facilities that have more risk exposure. For example, maybe you've got procurement, sales, and marketing folks, and facilities in high-risk countries that might have more risk of corruption and bribery challenges. So you may want to go ahead and organize some more in-depth follow-up training perhaps to your code of conduct that everybody gets, let's say, and you're going to delve into that topic either in a live venue and or follow-up communications to help reinforce the points you want to make there. So that would be the next level of advanced segmentation. Also, don't forget all those special groups that are out there. There are special groups that you have to think about. Think about the fact that some people have learning constraints. They may be, obviously, they may speak a different language than the corporate office. You may have to really think about translating, providing some method for them to understand the material, obviously, if it's not their language. They may have location issues. You may have people that are working on an oil platform. They may be working on a ship. They may drive a truck. You have to get very creative about allowing these people to access the education you're providing. Maybe you think about recording some sessions so that they can be played remotely at a time that works for some of these people. Maybe you think about sending out talk points for manager meetings to reinforce the messages you want to deliver. You probably want to localize the messages. It sounds like some of the people in our polling, Ingrid, were already doing some of that. You're going to want to, for instance, if you're talking about a gifts and entertainment policy and you're talking to people in China about it, you may want to use a mooncake example as opposed to a more westernized example. So that's some of the constraints you want to pay attention to. And then, of course, there's the classic problem of lack of computer access. What do people do when they don't have computers? Well, some organizations that I've been working with are doing things like providing kiosks, iPads that are chained down so that people can actually go to a computer, portable computer, and do their training or read some of their communications. Working with the devices that so many people have at their disposal now is really a good option to consider. And then also thinking about adapting perhaps some of the online training to a live venue or adapting communications to live delivery. Those are some things to bear in mind. So think about those special groups. I'm going to kick it back to Ingrid now.
Great. Now let's talk, the next thing, and there's a lot of great questions coming in, and I'm seeing a little bit of a trend in some of these, which is, how do I know how frequent is good enough? Like, how often should I be training? And I wish there was a great answer for you that I could say, from a legal perspective, this is answer X is the answer. Do it against answer X. Tell your executives that's what you need to do. Get the budget against it. And the problem is that we don't have clarity on some of that. We have best practice and we have lots of anecdotal experience, and that's what I'm going to share with you. There is some legal guidance, and we typically cue off of that. Mary has mentioned the federal sentencing guidelines. We have a declination of prosecution that I'm going to chat about, and we also have important federal and state laws in the employment law arena that really give you that sense of every 2 years to 12 months, somewhere in that range, but 2 years, that's the high point, especially for harassment training. So we'll dive into that because there's a lot of questions here. So really the first thing about scheduling training is not just the frequency, we're just talking about the scheduling of it. I've worked in the manufacturing setting when I used to work with General Mills and the Pillsbury Company. There were times that were off limits. You don't consider training during those times. We're either in a rush for a certain baking season or in a rush for holiday seasons, whatever it might be. So we have to be very considerate about that. Nothing is worse than compliance training unless it's compliance training that's forced on you during a terrible business time. So be sensitive to that. That's a big misstep that I think many organizations can make. And you want to make sure that you're delivering the right message to the right audience at that right time. If somebody's taking training that's not relevant to them and they're doing it during a busy time, that's, again, one of those, kind of thorn in the foot type of experiences. So as I noted, there's a couple things when you're trying to figure out the frequency of your training that you should look at. We'll look at legal obligations. We'll cue off of what other agencies or what the courts have said or the lawmakers have said is training that's good and long enough or soon enough. And we also want to benchmark our programs. And that's where that training benchmark report is an invaluable asset to you. So yeah, you'll just keep hearing me say that. I just think it's wonderful, and we're craving that information. So there was a question about, where can I get that benchmarking stuff? NAVEX has got great benchmarking for you. So the other is just getting solid on execution dates. Dates are easy to slip if you don't have, they're just easy to slip by and pass, and it'll be 3 or 4 months behind before you get your training program rolled out, unless you've got hard dates and you're measuring yourself against them. Now, Mary mentioned, kind of this marketing has really become, I think, a very important part of compliance. We need to market our programs. We need to market our messages. We want them to stick. And as you know, repetition, unfortunately, and consistency are two of the most important elements of this. And as you're thinking about your training program, I'm not talking about repeating the same course over and over again. I'm talking about repeating the core messages and finding creative and interesting ways so that they do remember the compliance jingle or compliance objectives and can easily reiterate them. So I mentioned Morgan Stanley. That happens to be one of the most important pieces of information for compliance professionals on the frequency of training. I will warn you, don't be alarmed if you haven't already, kind of looked at this or seen this or read something about it. Don't be alarmed. I call this the platinum standard. This is not a standard set by an agency that is achievable by most organizations. It is a platinum standard. And what they said was, Morgan Stanley, you've done a good job. Your training program really did try to educate your employees. We appreciate that. We want to reward that. And so they declined to prosecute, which is a big deal. I mean, that is a major, major, kind of affirmation for a compliance program, to be able to go back to your senior leaders and say, our program and the efforts we put forth saved us from a prosecution situation. So really amazing. But for the FCPA, they had trained this individual 7 times, and they had 54 touches with this individual on the corruption policies. And so they'd also trained them and reminded him 35 times. So that's why I say this is the platinum standard. Just know that agencies and courts, and they're looking for repetition. They're looking to say, did you do enough to let people know what's expected of them? So what do I say on frequency? When I look at topics, I look at the topics that are most pressing to my organization, that create the greatest risk, both legal and reputational, and I try to train on them with some regularity or frequency. I'm usually looking at a 12 to 24-month cycle on a topic. I do like to recommend some kind of a refresher or short burst training in an off year, so like a little 5-minute training that reminds you about your policy or reporting or whatever it might be. And then for secondary risk areas and those that aren't as pressing, I start to look at that 18 months to 3-year kind of window. You've got to look at the total number of risks you have and how much seat time you have, and then start to allocate it out across. I will say that the trend in learning is that courses are getting shorter. So we're not talking about a 2-hour, 1-hour training. A lot of topics are being addressed in 30 minutes. And as professionals, we know you're not going to get a lot covered in 30 minutes sometimes, but you're going to get something covered. So if it's highly effective, well-done training, you can pack a lot in that 30 minutes. So depth and duration, this is another thing. Use your risk analysis to decide what depth do I need. A 30-minute course is pretty good for a lot of learners. A lot of learners will get most of your learners will get just enough information to understand the general risks, what they need to be looking out for, and how they report concerns. But when you think about learners who are presenting you with greater risk, 30 minutes is likely not enough for them on that particular topic. A great example is harassment. Employees do not need a 2-hour course, even though managers in California are required to have 2 hours. They maybe need 30 minutes, maybe an hour, but 30 minutes is good, and a little refresher. Managers, and many of you are segmenting your populations by employee and manager, which is absolutely the philosophy that I adhere to and how I develop courseware, is providing managers with special lessons because they have unique obligations. Managers need it a little longer, so they should get more in-depth. And that's a great example of audience segmentation and different courses. Every learner doesn't need the same course. So this one gives you some additional tips on how to make that happen. So let's talk quickly, Mary, and we're getting close to, we've got about 20 minutes left, and let's try to just fly through the methods so we can get to really into the proof and measures, which is where I think people have some interest.
Absolutely. Okay, here we go. Let's talk about methods and the formats that you're going to be using to deploy your education. First is always good to start with your current state. What methods have you been using that work? What methods have you tried that don't work? What about other methods that you haven't tried that may be available at your organization that are maybe being used for other purposes? What's your budget? Are you able to bring in some other tools to help you deploy in a different way? Have you benchmarked with your peers for the trends? What about the content in training that you've been deploying every year or every 2 years? Have you refreshed it lately? What about technology? Do you have plans to have some new technology that will give you access to some new methods? Those are all questions to ask yourself. And don't limit yourself to just what you're used to. Think widely. Certainly you're going to want to have the formal training courses, both live and online, but you also want to think about the informal methods that are available to you. Potentially things like collaboration, blogs where people can learn from each other, maybe staff meeting talk points, communication tools that allow people to get different formats like ethics moments. Many of you may have safety moments. You might develop ethics moments, which are the first 2 minutes of every meeting in the organization. Ingrid talked about burst videos, a short 3 to 5 minute little video that can be launched as a training piece, can be launched as a communication piece. There's a lot of different ways that you can think about methods. And here is some information, again, from the benchmark survey that Ingrid just concluded, and it talks about the methods that people are using today. It seems that the average number of formats that people use right now are about 5. So organizations are using roughly 5 different formats. Most common, as you can see, are both online and live training. That's good news. And email comes in as a third there. You can see all the other different kinds of formats that are there. But the interesting trend is that print resources, the use of print materials, has gone down dramatically from 2014. So that's an interesting trend to keep an eye on. More digital formats are being used because they're easily available. And they also appeal to millennials. So whatever method that you choose or methods that you choose, you have to make sure that they're memorable. And how do you make those methods memorable? Well, certainly people love movies, so video can be very creative. You can make your own videos. You don't have to go out and buy them. You can see examples of some of the real creative videos that people have made around compliance topics on YouTube. The burst videos that Ingrid mentioned that are short form and appeal to the younger generation. Competitions. People love competitions. Get departments competing against each other. You can also do things around case studies. In our work, we hear it from employees all the time. We want more real case studies. We want to know what happens here and how those things were handled. So bear those in mind to keep it memorable. And then think about the new trends out there that you might not have considered. Things like games. Making some kind of a game. It can be on your intranet site. It can be deployed widely during Ethics Week. There's just a lot of ways to use games. Social networking. And I mentioned millennials. You know, we're going to have 75% of our workforce be millennials by 2030. And so that means we have to shift our vision to encompass these more short-form education methods and be flexible about when and how people are going to take their education, and also provide opportunities for collaboration. So Ingrid, let's get into the next couple of topics here as we move along.
So we're going to fly. These two are pretty quick to go through, and we'll get into some of the effectiveness stuff. But, you know, there's questions coming in about relating specifically to this topic, too. So this is a good one to cover. But you really, number one now, you've got all this stuff. You know, you've got all these elements of your plan in place. You've considered all the risks. You've considered the different measures, you know, or the different formats. you've kind of got them selected out, but you obviously need owners. Don't forget the owners. Things do not happen without an owner, with someone who has accountability for getting things done. And there are a lot of different owners that come up in an education plan. You've got those who must create and purchase the products or budget for them, those that need to review them, who deliver them, who make sure proof is collected and archived, who measure and report on outcomes, lots of these different ones. So just know that you've got to find those owners. Now, another question that has come up is, well, do you have to document everything, right? You know, certainly documenting every instance and every receipt and every possible interaction, I guess it's possible, but it's not necessary. And I say that because your program, first of all, your program needs to demonstrate that it's doing things to communicate. And so there are some things that, yes, you should be tracking on an individual basis. A full e-learning course, track it. A live course, a learning session, get those sign-in sheets. But beyond that, you can start to loosen up a little bit and track your program initiatives. So I'm sending out communications once a month. I have these manager resources available on a website. Maybe you track the website metrics. You know, we had 42,000 unique visitors or whatever the number might be. But be very smart and strategic about the things you track. Burst learning is one thing that a lot of organizations don't track. They send it out. They use a content delivery network. They don't necessarily use their learning management system, but they record that they have sent it out. But it's, you know, the more you can create the picture of what you're doing, the better you are when it comes to the day that you need to demonstrate the effectiveness of your program. So if you can digitize things, get them in a system, make it easy and convenient, consolidate all that information down, and just keep an easy record along with your education plan. And boy, that's, I think, really great evidence for a regulator or enforcement body or even in settlement negotiations. So measuring the program and its effectiveness is really one of the hot button issues this year. We certainly saw it last year in the Training Benchmark Report. It continues to come to the top of not only challenges but trends of what compliance professionals are going to focus on. And Mary, I know we just have probably a good 7 minutes or so we can get to some questions. Share with us a little bit about the measurement piece.
Okay, thanks, Ingrid. Yeah, the measurement piece really has three components. And I know it seems like this black box and how do you really do it, but if you boil it down, it's about the goal you have for the education that you're launching. What are you going to measure to see if you got to the goal, and what tools are you going to use to measure it? We've provided for you actually a handout, and I'll get to that in a minute, on the different pieces of measurement. And number one, the levels of measurement are really the goals. Are you measuring a reaction? What's your goal around reaction? Do you have a goal for learning? Do you have a goal for behavior? Those are your goals. And then what are you going to measure, or what is your pursuit to measure learning, to measure reaction? It would be the questions that we have provided here. Like, for instance, for learning, did participants remember the training? How are you going to do that? What tool are you going to use to find out if they remembered? Well, quizzes, probably pre and post quizzes. Surveys are another tool to use. So these are the kinds of things that you're going to want to measure per deliverables in terms of your education plan. And we've provided you with this downloadable tool to help you understand the levels, the goals that people consistently use. And often it's mostly about learning and behavior change. I'll tell you that right now. Level 2 and 3 are the most popular things that people measure, and the kinds of tools that you can use to measure that. So that's downloadable, and I think pretty self-explanatory. Let's get into the idea of what other people are measuring. Again, from our benchmark survey, we've gotten this data back that the number one way that people measure effectiveness is with completion rates. We know that completion rates are not actually a measure of effectiveness. It's a measure of deployment and completion. It's an operational measure. So if that's what you're doing right now and thinking of that as your effectiveness measure, it's probably time to think about some of these other objectives, these other ways of measuring effectiveness. So in conclusion on this, I know I'm racing through this, but I want to make sure we have time. We want to begin, as Ingrid said, we want to begin with the end in mind. You want to think about whatever tools you're going to use to measure effectiveness, that you set your definition of success up front. What will you call successful? And then choose your tools and your goals according to that definition. Each piece needs to have some measure of effectiveness in your plan overall as well. And so now let's get into operationalizing your plan. Back to Ingrid.
And Mary, you did a great job of flying through that. We could do a whole session on measuring effectiveness and what that means and what you look at. And I believe, Mary, that's going to be a topic at the upcoming NAVEX Global Virtual Conference,
yes,
which is the largest ethics and compliance conference now in the space. It's free and virtual, so you can, if you're interested, check out our website and you'll find information on how to register for that. But again, some really great stuff that's going to be presented during that session. Since we got a little bit of time here before we go into the operational, Mary, I just wanted to say, if you and I don't mind having a little conversation about, the methods that people can use. And, we got a question that came in on this. And, really, the measuring effectiveness is not about that there's 3 right ways to do it and every organization should do it. That list that we provide in the benchmark report results gives you a sense of some of the things that we see in the space that people are doing to measure effectiveness. We also find an interesting trend. Smaller organizations are better at doing the behavioral things to assess effectiveness than larger organizations are. It's not terribly startling, right? They have less people to talk to get reactions from. They can have those more personal interactions, where large organizations need to do things often more with surveys and seeking out generalized response. So one of the things that I really like, if I were going to go out and test the effectiveness of a program, I would probably try to do some kind of pre-course survey on knowledge, maybe 3 to 5 questions, and I might do a post-course survey or kind of question set to see whether or not people learned something and whether they retained it. So I would time that out. I think that's a good one. It takes planning. It takes a little bit of budget. You need to be willing to react to the results. Don't just get those kind of results and then let them sit, like, ooh, that wasn't effective training, and then you do nothing. Mary, are there some measures that you like or you particularly think companies should look at deploying?
I'm a fan of pre- and post-quizzing. I think that really gives you some real information on what people are retaining. Of course, when you apply the post-quiz, can affect your results. Some people will do immediately after training, for instance, and then maybe 3 months out. And then you're right, you do have to do something with that. Surveys are also good. Sometimes focus groups, depending, again, on your goal. If you're looking at culture change, focus groups can be a good tool.
Yeah, and you have wonderful stories to tell about focus groups and the information that external people to, external to your own organization who come in, people are really willing to open up and talk about stuff. So be open to feedback on your education efforts. So let's talk quickly about operationalizing your plan. I'm not going to go through this list step by step, but you now have this great plan created. You've got this template. You've done all this work. You now have to put it into play. And it is work, but once it's in play, once you've got it started, it becomes just part of how you run your training program. So it gets easier. I think the first step is always the hardest. And for those of you out there who said, we've got a plan in place, great, now you're doing some tweaking to it, and it's easier. You're tweaking, you're adjusting, you're improving, and keep a record of that, because that's obviously really great insight and proof for you. But make sure that you figure out the normal time period if you're buying or building training. How long is that going to take? Get that calendar with the owners out. Make sure you get alignment and you communicate stuff out to everybody who's a stakeholder, including the business leaders who will need to support this training in their, within their divisions or departments. And really make that, that you're focused on that, and you make sure that that happens for you. That will help operationalize this. And then revisiting your plan annually, making sure that you look back at that plan and say, we have a question that came in. Should the training plan be static, or does it need to breathe and live? Absolutely. You may mid-year find that cybersecurity is now something that your executives are breathing down your neck on. You need to adjust, and that's okay. So find a place for that training. It might bump something else or push it back or delay it, but absolutely make that a living plan. And that's really the basics of operationalizing. So key takeaways, download that template and use it. Like I said, that's something very special that Mary and the advisory service team is providing out to everyone on this particular webinar. And it's deceptively simple, right? But really the hard thing is trying to create one from scratch for yourself. So, and takeaways, I probably don't need to reiterate these, but it's really an important part of making your program more sophisticated and better at utilizing the scarce resources that you work with. Complexity of the plan, what's in it, what topics, it's very unique to your own organization. And again, that plan will pay back in spades. Learners will feel better because they feel like they're getting targeted education rather than sort of the buckshot approach. It will save you money, and it will increase, I think, the effectiveness of your overall program. So by all means, absolutely take the time now going forward at the end of the year and start to think about what your plan might look for. It wouldn't be a NAVEX webinar or presentation if we didn't give you an opportunity to reach out to us and have contact with us. We love to talk with our existing clients as well as prospects. We love to talk about our products. We believe very passionately in them. I believe personally that they bring really amazing things to the organizations that use and deploy them. And so we want to have a formal opportunity here to let you know. If you want us to call you, we'll be happy to do it. So just feel free to let us know. And with that, go ahead and respond to that. We've got a couple minutes for questions. So Artie, I think you were going to help us walk through some of the questions.
Absolutely, and what a great presentation. Thank you. Again, that was Ingrid Fredeen, JD Vice President, Online Learning Content, NAVEX Global, and Mary Bennett, Vice President, Advisory Services at NAVEX Global. If you'd like a copy of the slides just presented, you can download it from the drop-down menu on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. So let's move into the Q&A part of our session. We received some really good questions during the webcast, and since we're almost at the top of the hour, I'm going to throw these questions out to the panel in no particular order. And if your questions was not addressed, Mary and Ingrid will reach out to you via email. So the first question, is it important to use risk assessment results to inform your education plan?
Ingrid, I think that's your area.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're not doing one, it's something you should really look into doing. As I mentioned, head out to the NAVEX Global website. I've put this page up now that shows you some active links so you can get out to our website. But a risk assessment is really important. It helps focus what the topics are that you should be doing. It also will educate you about your organization. You'll be surprised. You'll learn a few things that you hadn't really been thinking about. So absolutely.
And also the final question is, you mentioned keeping content fresh and engaging. What recommendations do you have in order to accomplish this?
Fresh and engaging. I can take the top end of this, Ingrid. Fresh
Sure.
and engaging is really important in terms of making sure that you can go out there and grab, like if you're buying any kind of training or you're buying any kind of communication tools, make sure that content has appeal from a visual standpoint, from a current topic standpoint. I'm going to have you jump in on this one, Ingrid, because you have more to say about it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I say, one of the things is try not to repeat the same thing year after year after year. Try to add some different elements. You may have a consistent training product that you have to deploy. It's just a cost thing, but you can freshen it up by adding in burst learning or different types of communication tools. We had a great question come in from someone who wanted to know about whether we're seeing organizations use podcasting for locations that maybe don't have computer access and things like that. What are the trends I'm seeing? I'm seeing more and more social or collaborative learning. It's a very small number yet still, but organizations are starting to look into that. Webinars like we're doing today, also another possible solution for organizations that just don't have the ability to do the live training or they're not using e-learning for something. And then competitions. I mean, really, some of the fun stuff. I've got some organizations that would allow employees to submit compliance videos, like little short videos into the compliance department for a competition on you name the topic, and they get creative. And there's people in your organization that are going to do stuff a heck of a lot more creatively than I could, having done this for so many years now. But use those and allow employees to participate in the process. That's some of the things I would focus on.
Great. Thank you very much for an informative session, Ingrid and Mary. And a special thanks to NAVEX Global for making this webcast possible. This webcast has been recorded and will be available sometime in the next hour or so. CPE credit is now available to subscribers for archived webcasts. Please check out our on-demand CPE library under the Webcast tab at www.complianceweek.com. Once again, to obtain your CPE credit after the presentation, wait until I finish this wrap-up and please disable your pop-up blockers in order to access the exam. The webcast will close automatically and the final examination will be presented in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to info@complianceweek.com. Again, that's info@complianceweek.com to request a copy. This concludes our webcast. Thank you again for joining us, and goodbye.